During a family dinner, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you. Refuse the next drink. I kept eating and smiling. That night, I found hidden cameras in every room of my house, but when I discovered my wife's secret, I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I never thought a simple text message could shatter 43 years of marriage. But there I was, staring at my phone while my wife Sarah poured what she called my special wine into the crystal glass she'd inherited from her mother. The family dinner had been Sarah's idea, as usual. Our daughter Jennifer had driven down from Portland with her husband Marcus, and the house felt alive with conversation and laughter. At 65, I cherished these moments when our small family gathered around the mahogany dining table that had witnessed decades of birthdays, holidays, and quiet Sunday meals. "Dad, you're not drinking your wine," Jennifer noticed, gesturing toward my untouched glass. "Mom said she picked out something special for tonight." Sarah smiled that warm smile I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. "It's that Bordeaux you mentioned loving, honey, the one from our anniversary trip to France." I remembered that trip differently. We'd never been to France together. But before I could question it, my phone vibrated against my leg. Unknown number. "Don't react. They are recording you. Deny the next drink." My blood went cold. I glanced around the table, searching for any signs that someone was watching me differently. Sarah was cutting her salmon with precise movements. Jennifer was telling Marcus about her promotion at the marketing firm. Everything appeared normal, but that message sat heavy in my stomach like a stone. "Actually, I think I'll pass on the wine tonight," I said, pushing the glass slightly away from me. "My medication doesn't mix well with alcohol." Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Just for a second, but I caught it. "What medication, Richard? You're not taking anything new." "Just being cautious," I replied, forcing a smile while my mind raced. Sarah knew every pill I took, every doctor's appointment I attended. She handled all my medical arrangements, said it was easier that way since she was better with details. The conversation continued, but I found myself studying everyone's faces, listening to the tone of their voices, watching their body language. Jennifer kept glancing at her watch. Marcus seemed nervous, fidgeting with his napkin. And Sarah was watching me more intently than usual, as if waiting for something. After dessert, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I went to my study and locked the door. My hands shook as I examined every corner of the room I'd worked in for 20 years. Behind my college diploma, tucked against the wall, I found it. A tiny device no bigger than a button. My heart hammered against my ribs. I left it exactly where it was and continued searching. The bookshelf revealed another one hidden behind my father's war medals. A third was attached under my desk drawer. How long had they been there? How much had they seen and heard? I returned to the dining room, forcing myself to act normal while my world tilted on its axis. The conversation felt surreal now, like watching actors perform a play I wasn't supposed to understand. "Richard looks tired," Sarah mentioned to Jennifer, as if I wasn't sitting right there. "He's been so forgetful lately. Yesterday he couldn't remember where he put his reading glasses." I had found my reading glasses in Sarah's purse that morning, but I'd assumed she'd picked them up by mistake. Now I wondered if anything was really a mistake anymore. "Maybe you should see Dr. Patterson again," Jennifer suggested gently. "He could adjust your blood pressure medication. Sometimes that affects memory." I'd never had issues with my blood pressure. Dr. Patterson had told me last month that my health was excellent for a man my age. But Jennifer spoke as if my memory problems were common knowledge, something they'd discussed before. "I feel fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just a long day at the office." Sarah reached over and patted my hand. Her touch, once comforting, now felt calculating. "We just worry about you, darling. You know how much we love you." After Jennifer and Marcus left, promising to visit again soon, Sarah busied herself clearing the dishes. I helped, watching as she carefully disposed of my untouched wine, pouring it down the sink with what seemed like disappointment. "You didn't eat much either," she observed, scraping my barely touched plate into the garbage disposal. "Are you feeling sick?" "Just not very hungry," I lied, though the truth was I'd suddenly become afraid to eat anything she'd prepared. The paranoia felt ridiculous, but that message had planted a seed of doubt that was growing by the minute. That night, I lay awake listening to Sarah's steady breathing beside me. She'd taken her usual sleeping pill and fallen asleep quickly, but rest eluded me. I kept thinking about those tiny cameras, about the wine I hadn't drunk, about conversations that didn't match my memories. When I was certain Sarah was deeply asleep, I slipped out of bed and began a methodical search of our house. 43 years of marriage, and I was creeping through my own home like a burglar, looking for evidence that my family was spying on me. In the kitchen, I found another device hidden inside the ceramic fruit bowl Sarah's sister had given us last Christmas. The living room yielded two more, one behind the television and another tucked into the silk flower arrangement on the mantel. But it was the discovery in our bedroom that made my knees weak. Positioned to capture our bed, our most private moments, our intimate conversations, was a camera so small I almost missed it. How long had our privacy been violated? How long had someone been watching us sleep, dress, share the quiet moments that couples believe belong only to them? I returned to bed with my mind spinning. Sarah stirred as I settled under the covers. "Can't sleep?" she murmured, her voice thick with medication-induced drowsiness. "Just restless," I whispered back. She moved closer, draping her arm across my chest in a gesture that had once meant safety and love. Now it felt like a chain, holding me in place while unseen eyes watched from the darkness. The next morning, Sarah seemed unusually cheerful as she prepared breakfast. She hummed while scrambling eggs, chatted about her plans to visit her sister next weekend, and mentioned that Dr. Patterson's office had called to schedule my follow-up appointment. "I didn't know I had a follow-up scheduled," I said, accepting the plate she offered me. "Oh, it's just routine," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "He wants to check your levels, make sure everything's balanced." I stared at the eggs, wondering what might be hidden in them, what levels needed checking when I felt perfectly healthy. The coffee smelled normal, looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. My phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. "Trust no one in that house. Your life depends on it." This time, I was ready. I deleted the message immediately and slipped the phone back into my pocket, but Sarah had been watching. "Work emergency?" she asked casually, but her eyes were sharp, focused. "Just spam," I replied, taking a small bite of eggs while she watched. The taste was slightly bitter, different from how Sarah usually prepared them. I chewed slowly, swallowed carefully, and smiled at my wife of 43 years, wondering if she was trying to kill me. 3 days passed before I found the courage to search Sarah's office. She'd gone to her weekly book club meeting, the same group of women she'd been meeting with for 15 years. I had exactly 2 hours before she returned, and I intended to use every minute. Sarah's home office had always been her private sanctuary. In all our years of marriage, I'd respected that boundary, only entering when she specifically invited me in. Now, as I stood in the doorway of the room decorated in soft blues and yellows, I felt like a stranger violating sacred ground. But the feeling passed quickly when I remembered those cameras, that bitter taste in my breakfast, the way Jennifer had spoken about my memory as if it were failing. Something was terribly wrong in my house, and I needed answers. I started with her desk, an antique piece she'd inherited from her grandmother. The top drawers contained the usual items: pens, paper clips, old receipts, but the bottom drawer was locked. In 43 years, I'd never known Sarah to lock anything. The key was hidden under her jewelry box, taped to the bottom with clear tape that had yellowed with age. Whatever she was hiding, she'd been hiding it for a long time. Inside the drawer, I found a manila folder labeled "Richard, Medical," in Sarah's careful handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it, unsure what I'd find, but certain I wouldn't like it. The first document was a psychiatric evaluation report dated 6 months ago. According to Dr. Helena Vasquez, a doctor I'd never heard of, I was exhibiting signs of early-onset dementia and mild cognitive impairment. The report detailed incidents I had no memory of: aggressive outbursts, paranoid delusions, severe memory lapses. "Patient becomes agitated when questioned about his condition," the report stated. Wife reports he sometimes doesn't recognize her in the mornings and has accused her of moving his belongings to confuse him. I'd never accused Sarah of anything. I'd never been evaluated by Dr. Vasquez. Yet here was an official medical document, complete with letterhead and signatures, painting me as a man losing his mind. The next document made my blood run cold. It was a competency evaluation form, partially filled out, recommending that I be declared mentally incompetent to handle my own affairs. Sarah's signature was already on the form, along with Jennifer's. They were waiting for something, or someone, to complete the process. Beneath the medical documents, I found financial papers that made even less sense. Bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize, showing regular withdrawals of significant amounts. $12,000 here, $8,000 there, all with my supposed signature authorizing the transfers. But it was the insurance documents that revealed the full scope of what was happening. Sarah had increased my life insurance policy to $2 million just 8 months ago. The premium payments were being automatically deducted from an account I thought contained only $5,000, but according to these statements, it held over $300,000. Where had that money come from? I managed our finances carefully, kept detailed records, balanced our checkbooks religiously. Yet here was evidence of funds I knew nothing about. Insurance policies I'd never signed. Medical evaluations I'd never attended. My phone buzzed. Another message from my unknown guardian angel. Check your coffee maker. She's been medicating you for months. I raced to the kitchen, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The coffee maker looked normal, the same stainless steel model we'd owned for 3 years. But when I opened the water reservoir, I found a small plastic device attached to the inside wall. It was barely visible, designed to dissolve something into the water as it heated. I carefully removed it and found tiny holes that would have allowed liquid to seep through. Whatever had been in that device was now in my system, had been in my system for months, affecting my thinking, my memory, my behavior. No wonder I'd been feeling foggy lately, more tired than usual. I'd attributed it to age, to the natural slowing down that comes with being 65. Instead, my own wife had been systematically drugging me. The garage yielded more disturbing discoveries. Hidden behind paint cans and garden tools, I found boxes of medical supplies, syringes, various medications with labels I couldn't pronounce, and detailed charts tracking dosages and effects. Sarah had been conducting some kind of twisted experiment on me, documenting my decline with scientific precision. One chart particularly caught my attention. It tracked my behavioral changes over the past year, noting increased confusion, memory lapses, and what she called compliance improvements. Each entry was dated and timed, creating a timeline of my mental deterioration that perfectly matched the psychiatric evaluation I'd found in her desk. But perhaps the most damning evidence was a letter hidden at the bottom of one box. It was addressed to Sarah from someone named Dr. Marcus Rothenberg, thanking her for her patience with this delicate process, and assuring her that Richard's condition will progress naturally without any possibility of detection. The letter went on to detail the next phases of my supposed decline, including recommendations for when to seek guardianship and how to handle my increasing agitation as the medication effects intensified. They had planned my mental destruction with the same care most people put into planning a vacation. I photographed everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly I had to take several shots of each document to ensure they were readable. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, but I knew I couldn't confront Sarah directly. If she suspected I knew the truth, there was no telling how far she might go to protect her plan. Instead, I carefully returned everything to its original position, making sure the garage boxes were stacked exactly as I'd found them, the desk drawer locked again, the key replaced under the jewelry box. But I couldn't replace the device from the coffee maker. That had to disappear permanently. I flushed it down the toilet and watched it spiral away, taking months of chemical manipulation with it. When Sarah returned from book club, I was sitting in my recliner reading the newspaper, the picture of a content-retired husband. She kissed my forehead and asked about my day in the same loving tone she'd used for 43 years. Quiet day, I replied, not looking up from the sports section. I took a nap after lunch. Must be getting old. She laughed, the sound I'd once found musical now seeming sinister. We're both getting old, honey, but that just means we have more time to enjoy each other's company. That night, she prepared my usual bedtime snack, chamomile tea, and a small piece of her homemade banana bread. I'd always appreciated this ritual, this gentle transition from day to night that we'd shared for years. Now I watched her preparation with new eyes, noting how she disappeared into the pantry for a moment while the tea steeped, how she stirred the cup more than necessary, how she watched me take my first sip with an intensity that seemed excessive for banana bread and tea. The tea tasted normal, but I'd learned not to trust normal anymore. I drank half the cup, praised the banana bread, and kissed Sarah goodnight with lips that felt thick and unsteady. Within an hour, I was drowsy beyond reason, my thoughts becoming sluggish and disconnected. Whatever she'd put in that tea was strong, designed to ensure I'd sleep deeply and wake confused. But I'd been expecting it this time. Before the drug could take full effect, I stumbled to the bathroom and forced myself to vomit, retching until my stomach was empty and my head began to clear. I returned to bed, careful to breathe deeply and naturally, mimicking the sleep patterns Sarah expected. She checked on me twice during the night, standing in the doorway listening to my breathing. satisfied that her husband was safely unconscious and vulnerable. As I lay there pretending to sleep, I realized that discovering the truth was only the beginning. Now I had to figure out who I could trust, how to protect myself, and most importantly, how to stop a woman who'd spent months systematically destroying my mind and was apparently planning to finish the job permanently. The unknown messenger had saved my life with that first warning, but I still didn't know who they were or why they were helping me. What I did know was that my time was running out, and whatever Sarah had planned for the next phase of my condition was likely to be the last phase I'd ever experience. The revelation came on a Tuesday morning when I finally met my mysterious guardian angel. I'd been pretending to take my medication for a week, palming the pills Sarah handed me each morning and flushing them later. My mind was clearer than it had been in months, but that clarity brought a terrifying awareness of how close I'd come to losing everything. Sarah had left for her monthly appointment with her gynecologist, a routine that gave me exactly 3 hours of freedom. I was searching through more of her hidden documents when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a man I didn't recognize, tall, gray-haired, wearing a simple blue suit that looked expensive but understated. "Richard," he said when I opened the door. "I'm Thomas. I've been sending you those messages." I stepped back, uncertain whether to trust him, but he raised his hands peacefully. "I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to listen carefully. Your wife isn't working alone, and we don't have much time. Thomas wasn't a stranger after all. He was my brother. I'd thought Thomas was dead. Sarah had shown me the obituary 18 months ago, had comforted me through my grief over losing my only sibling. We'd attended his funeral service where I'd spoken about childhood memories and the brother I'd never see again. I'd mourned him deeply, regretting all the conversations we'd never had after our falling out over our father's will. But Thomas was very much alive, standing in my living room explaining how Sarah had orchestrated his fake death as part of a larger plan to isolate me completely. She hired actors to play funeral home staff, Thomas explained, settling into the chair across from mine. The whole service was staged. "While you thought you were burying me, I was in a hospital in Denver, recovering from a heart attack that nearly killed me. When I tried to contact you during my recovery, Sarah told everyone I was having a psychotic breakdown, that I was making disturbing calls and needed to be kept away from you." My hands shook as I processed this information. But the obituary, the funeral home, the cemetery, all fake. Sarah paid substantial amounts to create a convincing performance. The funeral home was rented for the day, the actors were professional, and the cemetery plot you visited belongs to someone who died decades ago. Thomas pulled out a folder thick with documents. "She's been planning this for 3 years, Richard. Everything you've discovered is just the surface." The folder contained evidence that shattered what remained of my world. Sarah hadn't just been drugging me and stealing my money. She'd been systematically destroying every relationship I valued, isolating me until she was my only connection to the outside world. My closest friend from college, Martin, hadn't stopped calling because he was busy with his grandchildren. Sarah had been intercepting his calls and emails, telling him I'd developed dementia and didn't want to see anyone from my past. She'd sent him fake emails from my account, rambling and incoherent messages that convinced him I was losing my mind. My former business partner, James, had tried to visit me 6 times in the past year. Each time, Sarah had turned him away, claiming I was having a bad day or was too confused to receive visitors. She'd told him I'd accused him of stealing from our old company, poisoning a friendship that had lasted 40 years. Even our neighbors had been manipulated. The Hendersons next door thought I'd become hostile and paranoid because Sarah had told them about my episodes and asked them to keep their distance for everyone's safety. "She's been creating a narrative," Thomas explained, his voice heavy with anger, "making everyone believe you're mentally incompetent while simultaneously drugging you to make the symptoms real. It's psychological warfare designed to leave you completely dependent on her." But the most devastating revelation was about Jennifer. My daughter, my precious girl who'd visited for that family dinner, wasn't an innocent victim in Sarah's scheme. "Jennifer knows everything," Thomas said gently, clearly seeing the pain in my eyes. "She's been involved from the beginning. The promotion she mentioned at dinner? That's money Sarah's been funneling to her from your accounts. Marcus doesn't know. He thinks Jennifer received an inheritance from Sarah's side of the family. The financial documents Thomas showed me revealed the full scope of their theft. Over the past 2 years, Sarah and Jennifer had systematically drained my retirement accounts, my savings, and my investment portfolio. The total amount stolen was staggering, over $800,000 that I'd spent 40 years accumulating. They'd used my money to pay off Jennifer's mortgage, fund her husband's failed business ventures, and support Sarah's increasingly expensive lifestyle. The antique furniture I'd admired, the jewelry Sarah wore, the expensive wine she served, all purchased with my stolen money while they convinced me I was losing my mind. The psychiatric evaluation was the next step, Thomas continued. Once Dr. Vasquez signed off on your incompetency, Sarah would have gained full control of your remaining assets. The life insurance policy would have made her a wealthy widow within 6 months. I felt sick. How did you find out? I hired a private investigator when I couldn't reach you after my heart attack. At first I thought you were angry about Dad's will, but the investigator discovered Sarah's fake death certificate and started digging deeper. We've been building this case for 8 months, gathering evidence and waiting for the right moment to expose her. Thomas handed me a business card for Detective Maria Santos with the Financial Crimes Unit. She's been working with us, but we needed proof that you were being drugged and that your mental state was artificially induced. Your cooperation will be crucial for prosecution. Why didn't you contact me sooner? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Because we weren't sure how deeply the drugs had affected you. We needed you lucid and coherent to serve as a witness. Sarah's been very careful. The medications she's been using can cause permanent cognitive damage if administered long enough. We couldn't risk waiting much longer. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a physical force. My wife of 43 years, the woman I'd trusted with my life, my health, my future, had been systematically destroying me for 3 years. My daughter, whom I'd loved unconditionally, had helped steal my life savings while pretending to be concerned about my welfare. There's more, Thomas said quietly. This isn't Sarah's first time. He showed me records from her previous marriage, 28 years before she met me. Her first husband, Gerald Morrison, had died of what appeared to be early-onset Alzheimer's at the age of 57. The progression of his disease had been remarkably fast, and he died just 18 months after diagnosis, leaving Sarah a wealthy widow. The investigator found medical records showing Gerald's symptoms began shortly after Sarah convinced him to update his will. Sound familiar? I thought about my own will, updated 2 years ago at Sarah's suggestion. I'd left everything to her, with a smaller inheritance for Jennifer. At the time, it had seemed natural. Sarah was my wife, my partner, the person who would need security after my death. Now I realized I'd signed my own death warrant. Gerald's death was ruled natural, Thomas continued, but his brother always suspected something was wrong. He couldn't prove anything at the time, but he's been documenting Sarah's pattern for decades. When she married you, he tried to warn you, but Sarah intercepted his letters. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Running late at the doctor, home in 2 hours. Hope you're resting, darling. Thomas gathered his documents quickly. She's going to accelerate the timeline now. Dr. Vasquez is scheduled to conduct your final evaluation next week. Once she signs the competency papers, Sarah will have complete control over your medical decisions. What happens then? I asked, though I feared I already knew. You'll be committed to a private facility where Sarah controls your care. The medications will be increased until you're completely incapacitated. She'll tell everyone you're comfortable but declining rapidly. Within 6 months, you'll die of natural causes, heart failure, stroke, something that won't raise suspicions. Thomas handed me a small device that looked like a hearing aid. This is a recording device. We need Sarah to confess, to admit what she's been doing. It's the only way to prove premeditation and ensure she faces serious charges. She'll never confess to me. She will if she thinks you're dying. The investigator found communications between Sarah and Dr. Rothenberg discussing the final stages of your treatment. They're planning to increase your medication to dangerous levels within the next few days. If Sarah believes you're having a medical crisis, she might reveal the truth. Thomas's plan was terrifying but necessary. I would pretend to have a severe reaction to the medication, convincing Sarah that I was dying ahead of schedule. In her panic or triumph, she might say something incriminating that would seal her fate. Detective Santos will be monitoring from a van outside, Thomas assured me. If anything goes wrong, if Sarah becomes violent or tries to harm you, they'll intervene immediately. As Thomas prepared to leave, he gripped my shoulder firmly. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this, Richard. I'm sorry she made you think I was dead while she was slowly killing you. After he left, I sat in my empty house, staring at the recording device and processing everything I'd learned. My marriage was a lie. My daughter was a thief. My entire life for the past 3 years had been a carefully orchestrated deception designed to end with my death. But I wasn't dead yet. And now I knew exactly what Sarah was planning, which meant I could plan too. When she returned from her appointment, I would begin the most important performance of my life. Sarah returned from her appointment with an unusual brightness in her step, humming as she hung her purse in the hallway closet. She seemed almost excited, which made my stomach churn with the knowledge of what that excitement likely meant. "How was your appointment?" I asked from my recliner, the recording device Thomas had given me tucked discreetly in my shirt pocket. "Oh, fine. Just routine." She moved around the kitchen with purpose, opening cabinets and gathering ingredients. "I thought I'd make your favorite tonight, pot roast with those little potatoes you love." In 43 years of marriage, Sarah had never made pot roast on a Tuesday. We saved elaborate meals for weekends or special occasions. But I understood now that this wasn't about dinner. This was about creating the perfect setting for whatever she had planned. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. "Should I help with anything?" No, you just rest. You've seemed so tired lately." She paused in her preparations, studying my face with what appeared to be concern, but now felt like clinical observation. "Actually, have you been taking your vitamins? You look a little pale." The vitamins. I'd been flushing those too, along with the other medications she'd been giving me. Whatever was in those pills was stronger than what she'd been putting in my coffee, because I'd noticed the difference immediately when I stopped taking them. "I think I forgot them this morning," I lied. "My memory's been so foggy lately." Sarah's smile was sympathetic, but there was something predatory in her eyes. "Let me get them for you. Dr. Patterson specifically said you need to be consistent with the dosage." She disappeared upstairs to our bathroom, where she kept my medication in a locked box she claimed was for safety. I'd never questioned why vitamins needed to be locked away, but then again, I'd never questioned much of anything Sarah did. She'd trained me well over the years to trust her judgment in all matters related to my health and welfare. When she returned, she was carrying not just the vitamin bottle, but also a small paper cup with what looked like a white pill. "Dr. Patterson called while I was out," she said, handing me the cup along with a glass of water. "He wants you to start taking this new supplement. It's supposed to help with the memory issues." I stared at the pill, knowing it was probably designed to do the exact opposite of helping my memory. What kind of supplement? Something for cognitive function. He said it might take a few days to see improvement, but it should help with the confusion. Sarah sat on the arm of my chair, her hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture that once would have been comforting. "You want to get better, don't you, honey?" The question felt loaded, dangerous. I nodded and placed the pill on my tongue, taking a small sip of water but not swallowing. "Of course I do." Sarah watched me carefully, and only when she was satisfied that I'd taken the medication did she return to her cooking. I waited until she was busy with the roast before slipping into the bathroom and spitting the pill into my palm. It was larger than a typical vitamin, with no identifying marks or numbers. I flushed it and returned to the living room, where Sarah was setting the table with our good china, another unusual choice for a Tuesday dinner. She'd even lit candles, creating an atmosphere that would have been romantic under different circumstances. "This is lovely," I said, settling into my usual chair. "What's the special occasion?" "Do I need a special occasion to make dinner for my husband?" She leaned down and kissed my forehead, lingering longer than usual. "I just want to take care of you, Richard. I want to make sure you're comfortable and happy." The word comfortable sent chills down my spine. In the context of everything I'd learned, it sounded less like love and more like preparation for the end. Dinner conversation was strangely normal, almost aggressively so. Sarah asked about my day, shared gossip from her book club, and discussed plans for the upcoming weekend. But I caught her watching me between topics, studying my responses and reactions as if evaluating my condition. "Jennifer called this afternoon," she mentioned casually while serving dessert. "She's concerned about you. She thinks you seemed confused during their last visit." "I felt fine that night," I replied carefully. "Well, sometimes we don't realize when we're having difficulties. That's one of the cruel things about memory problems. The patient often doesn't recognize the symptoms." Sarah's tone was gentle, educational, as if she were explaining my condition to a child. "Jennifer thinks it might be time to consider getting you some additional help." "What kind of help?" "Nothing dramatic. Maybe someone to come in during the day, help with your medications, make sure you're eating properly, just until we can get your condition stabilized. A home health aide who would be under Sarah's control, ensuring I took whatever medications she prescribed and preventing me from having unsupervised contact with the outside world. It was the next step in my imprisonment. I don't think I need help yet, I said, testing her reaction. Sarah's smile never wavered, but I caught a flash of irritation in her eyes. Of course you don't think you need help, honey. That's part of the problem. People with cognitive decline often lack insight into their condition. She spoke about my cognitive decline as if it were established fact, not the result of months of systematic poisoning. The gaslighting was so complete, so professionally executed, that I might have believed her if Thomas hadn't shown me the evidence. After dinner, Sarah suggested we watch television together, something we'd done countless times over the years. But tonight felt different. She kept checking her watch, and I noticed she'd positioned herself where she could observe me without appearing to stare. Around 9 o'clock, I began to feel genuinely tired, not the artificial drowsiness from her drugs, but natural fatigue from the stress of maintaining my performance. Sarah noticed immediately. You look exhausted, sweetheart. Why don't you go up to bed? I'll clean up down here. That sounds good, I agreed, standing slowly and making a show of steadying myself against the chair. I do feel a bit dizzy. Sarah was beside me instantly, her hand on my arm. Dizzy? How long have you been feeling like that? Just started, I lied, noticing how quickly she'd moved to support me. Probably just tired. Maybe you should sit back down for a minute. There was urgency in her voice now, and I realized she was evaluating whether this was the reaction she'd been expecting from whatever she'd tried to give me earlier. I think I just need sleep, I insisted, pulling away gently. I'll be fine in the morning. Sarah followed me upstairs, hovering as I prepared for bed. She watched me brush my teeth, helped me find my pajamas, and fluffed my pillows with excessive attention to detail. Are you sure you're feeling all right? She asked again as I settled under the covers. No nausea, no confusion. Just tired, I repeated, though I was beginning to understand that my lack of symptoms was disappointing her. Whatever she'd tried to give me was supposed to have stronger effects by now. Sarah kissed my forehead and turned off the light, but she didn't leave the room immediately. She stood in the doorway for several minutes, and I could feel her watching me in the darkness. When she finally went downstairs, I heard her making phone calls. Her voice was too low for me to make out words, but the tone was urgent, almost frantic. Something wasn't going according to plan. Around midnight, she returned to check on me again. I kept my breathing steady and deep, pretending to be asleep while she moved around the room. She seemed to be looking for something, opening and closing drawers quietly. Then I heard her gasp softly. When I risked opening my eyes just a crack, I saw her holding the vitamin bottle, shaking it next to her ear. It was too full. She'd realized I hadn't been taking the pills she'd been giving me. Sarah stood frozen for a long moment, the bottle clutched in her hand. Then she moved to my side of the bed and leaned down close to my face, listening to my breathing, checking to see how deeply I was sleeping. I forced myself to remain completely still as she studied me, fighting the urge to recoil when her fingers touched my wrist, checking my pulse. Whatever she felt must have satisfied her, because she straightened up and left the room. But she was back within minutes, carrying something in her hand. In the dim light from the hallway, I could see it was a syringe. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my breathing steady as Sarah approached the bed. She was going to inject me with something while I slept, ensuring that whatever drug she'd failed to give me earlier would enter my system directly. The recording device was still in my shirt pocket, hidden in the laundry hamper where I'd placed it before changing into pajamas. I needed to get Sarah talking, needed her to confess what she was doing before she rendered me unconscious or worse. As she reached for my arm, I opened my eyes and looked directly at her. Sarah, I whispered, making my voice sound confused and groggy. What are you doing? She froze, the syringe still in her hand, caught in the act of trying to drug her sleeping husband. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then Sarah's face transformed, shifting from the loving wife I'd known to something cold and calculating. You haven't been taking your medication, she said quietly, her voice carrying no pretense of affection. I don't understand. I sat up slowly, reaching for the lamp. What medication? Don't play stupid with me, Richard. The vitamins, the supplements, the pills I've been giving you for months. You've been flushing them, haven't you? The mask was finally slipping. After months of careful manipulation and false concern, Sarah was showing me who she really was. "Why would I flush vitamins?" I asked, stalling for time while trying to figure out how to retrieve the recording device. Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because you're not as stupid as we thought you were. Somehow you figured it out." "I figured what out?" She held up the syringe, examining it in the lamplight. "This would have been so much easier if you'd just cooperated. If you just kept taking your medicine like a good patient and slipped away quietly." This was it, the confession Thomas needed. But the recording device was across the room, and Sarah was holding a syringe full of what was probably enough poison to kill me. I had to keep her talking long enough for help to arrive, assuming Thomas's people were monitoring the situation as promised. But first, I needed to understand just how deep this conspiracy went. "Jennifer knows, doesn't she?" I asked. Sarah's smile was cold and triumphant. "Jennifer's been very helpful. She needed the money, and I needed someone to corroborate your mental decline. It worked out perfectly for everyone. Except for me." "Well," Sarah said, moving closer with the syringe, "you won't have to worry about that much longer." Sarah moved toward me with the syringe, but I wasn't the helpless victim she thought I was anymore. Months of her drugs had left my system, and adrenaline sharpened my reflexes as I rolled away from her reach. "Stay still, Richard," she hissed, lunging forward. "This will be over quickly." I grabbed the bedside lamp, yanking the cord from the wall and swinging it toward her. Sarah jumped back, the syringe still clutched in her fist, her carefully composed mask completely gone now. "You stupid old fool," she snarled. "Do you have any idea how much money we've already spent on your treatment? How much time I've wasted making sure you deteriorated at exactly the right pace?" "Treatment?" I backed toward the bedroom door, keeping the lamp between us. "You mean poisoning." "I mean managing your condition so your death would look natural. Do you think it's easy to slowly kill someone without raising suspicions? Do you know how carefully I had to calibrate those medications?" Sarah was confessing everything, but the recording device was still in my shirt pocket across the room. I needed to get to it, or at least keep her talking until Thomas's people intervened. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked, edging toward the dresser where my clothes lay. 3 years, she admitted, her voice filled with pride rather than shame. "From the moment I realized how much your retirement accounts were worth. Gerald Morrison was good practice, but you're the real prize. So you did kill your first husband." Sarah laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. "Gerald was pathetic, weak, trusting, exactly like you. He actually thanked me for taking such good care of him, even as I was poisoning him every day. Men are so eager to be helpless, to let women handle everything for them." I reached the dresser and pretended to stumble, grabbing my shirt and palming the recording device. Now I just needed to activate it without Sarah noticing. "Jennifer was supposed to keep you distracted during dinner that night," Sarah continued, advancing on me again. "The wine had enough sedative to knock you unconscious for 12 hours. I was going to inject you while you slept, and by morning you'd be dead of apparent heart failure, but I didn't drink the wine. No, thanks to whoever sent you those ridiculous text messages. We still haven't figured out who's been interfering with our plan." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "It doesn't matter now. This ends tonight, one way or another." I managed to activate the recording device, slipping it into my pajama pocket as Sarah raised the syringe again. But before she could strike, we both heard footsteps on the stairs. "Mom," Jennifer's voice called from the hallway. "Is everything okay?" I heard shouting. Sarah's expression shifted instantly, the cold killer disappearing behind her maternal mask. "Everything's fine, sweetheart," she called back, though she kept the syringe ready. "Your father's having one of his episodes." Jennifer appeared in the doorway, and the sight of her made my heart break all over again. My daughter, my precious girl, looked at me with pity and fear rather than love. "Dad, you need to calm down," Jennifer said gently, stepping into the room. "Mom's just trying to help you." "Help me?" I stared at her in disbelief. "She's trying to inject me with poison." Jennifer exchanged a look with Sarah, and I saw the truth in that silent communication. My daughter wasn't just aware of the plan, she was an active participant. "It's medication, Dad," Jennifer said in the patient tone one uses with confused children. "Dr. Vasquez prescribed it for your anxiety. You've been having delusions lately, paranoid thoughts about Mom trying to hurt you." The gaslighting was so complete, so professionally executed, that for a moment I almost doubted my own sanity. But then I remembered Thomas, the evidence, the financial records showing how much money they'd already stolen. I know about the bank accounts, I said quietly. I know about the $800,000 you've taken from my retirement funds. Jennifer's face went white, but Sarah remained composed. See how confused he is, she told Jennifer. He's making up stories about missing money. Doctor Vasquez warned us this would happen as his condition deteriorated. I have proof, I insisted. But even as I said it, I realized how desperate I sounded. Thomas showed me everything. Thomas is dead, Dad, Jennifer said gently. We went to his funeral together, remember? You're having false memories again. The systematic destruction of my reality was masterful. They'd isolated me from every friend, every family member, every source of support or validation. If Thomas hadn't survived and gathered evidence, I would have been completely helpless. Your brother tried to contact you several times before he died, Sarah added, moving closer with the syringe. But his messages were incoherent, rambling. He was having mental health issues of his own. That's not true. Dad, please, Jennifer pleaded. Let Mom give you the medicine. You'll feel so much better once your anxiety is under control. I looked at my daughter, searching for any sign of the loving child I'd raised, but her eyes were cold and calculating. The money had corrupted her completely, turning her into a stranger who could watch her father die for financial gain. How much is Sarah paying you? I asked her directly. Jennifer's composure cracked slightly. I don't know what you mean. Your mortgage is paid off. Marcus's business debts are gone. You told me about a promotion, but the money came from my accounts, didn't it? Dad, you're scaring me, Jennifer whispered, but I could see the guilt in her expression. I'm scaring you. I backed against the wall, cornered now with nowhere to run. I'm not the one planning murder. Sarah had heard enough. She lunged forward with the syringe, but this time I was ready. I grabbed her wrist, fighting for control of the weapon while Jennifer screamed behind us. Sarah was stronger than I'd expected, fueled by desperation and years of careful planning. The syringe wavered between us as we struggled, its contents meant to stop my heart permanently. Help me, Sarah gasped to Jennifer. Hold him down. For a moment, Jennifer hesitated. I saw the conflict in her face, the last remnants of whatever love she'd once felt for me, warring with her greed and fear. Then she chose greed. Jennifer grabbed my arms from behind, pinning me while Sarah positioned the syringe. I felt the needle pierce my skin, felt the burning sensation as whatever cocktail of drugs began entering my bloodstream. But before Sarah could push the plunger completely, the bedroom door exploded inward. Police! Nobody move! Detective Santos burst through the doorway with two uniformed officers, weapons drawn. Sarah froze with the syringe still half empty, caught in the act of murdering her husband. Step away from him, Detective Santos commanded. Drop the syringe and put your hands where I can see them. Sarah's face transformed one final time, shifting from killer to victim in an instant. Thank God you're here, she cried, dropping the syringe and raising her hands. My husband's having a psychotic break. He attacked me. We heard everything, Detective Santos said coldly. The house has been under surveillance for the past week. We have recordings of your confession. The recording device in my pocket had been transmitting everything to Thomas's people outside. Every word of Sarah's confession, every detail of her plan, had been captured and witnessed by law enforcement. Jennifer released my arms and backed away, her face pale with shock. I didn't know, she stammered. I thought Dad was really sick. Mom said the medicine was to help him. You knew exactly what you were doing, Detective Santos replied, producing handcuffs. We have bank records showing your participation in the theft of over $800,000 from your father's accounts. As the officers arrested Sarah and Jennifer, I slumped against the wall, my arm burning where the syringe had pierced my skin. Whatever they'd injected me with was making my vision blur and my heart race. Get the paramedics up here, Detective Santos called into her radio. We need medical attention for the victim. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face grim but relieved. We got them, Richard. It's over. But as the drug Sarah had injected began taking full effect, I wondered if we'd stopped them in time, or if they'd succeeded in their plan after all. The room spun around me as consciousness began to fade, and the last thing I heard was Sarah screaming that she'd done nothing wrong, that I was the one who was crazy. Even as they arrested her for attempted murder, she was still trying to manipulate the narrative, still playing the role of the devoted wife whose mentally ill husband had turned violent. Some people never stop lying, even when the truth is undeniable. As the paramedics worked to stabilize me, I held on to one thought. The recording device had captured everything. Whatever happened to me now, Sarah and Jennifer would face justice for what they'd done. The woman I'd loved for 43 years would spend the rest of her life in prison, and the daughter I'd raised with such hope and pride would join her there. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted for my family, but it was the ending they'd chosen for themselves. 6 months later, I sat in the witness chair of a courtroom packed with reporters and spectators, facing the woman who had tried to destroy my life. Sarah looked smaller somehow, diminished by the orange jumpsuit and shackles, but her eyes still held that calculating coldness I'd learned to recognize. The trial had been a media sensation. Wife poisons husband for insurance money was the kind of story that captivated the public, especially when the financial evidence revealed the scope of their systematic theft and the medical testimony explained how close they'd come to succeeding. Dr. Helena Vasquez, the psychiatrist who'd written the false evaluation declaring me mentally incompetent, had already pleaded guilty to medical fraud and conspiracy. Her testimony revealed the extent of the network Sarah had built: corrupt doctors, fake medical facilities, and forged documents designed to support her claim that I was dying of natural causes. The defendant administered a combination of benzodiazepines and anticholinergic drugs. Dr. Michael Chang, the toxicologist, testified earlier that morning. These medications, when given consistently over months, would cause exactly the symptoms of dementia and cognitive decline described in the psychiatric reports. The dosages were carefully calibrated to avoid detection while creating genuine impairment. The prosecution had presented overwhelming evidence. Bank records showing $800,000 transferred from my accounts to Jennifer's. Insurance documents increasing my policy to $2 million. Medical equipment found in Sarah's garage. And most damning of all, the recordings from that final night when Sarah confessed everything. Now it was my turn to testify, to tell the court what it felt like to be systematically poisoned by the person you trusted most. Mr. Morrison, the prosecutor began, can you describe your mental state during the months when your wife was administering these drugs? I gripped the microphone, my voice steady despite the weight of the memories. I felt like I was losing my mind. I'd forget conversations, misplace things, feel confused about events that had just happened. I thought I was developing dementia like my father had. Did you ever suspect that your wife was responsible for these symptoms? Never. Sarah was the one taking care of me, scheduling my doctor appointments, managing my medications. She seemed as concerned about my condition as I was. She was the person I turned to for help when I felt confused or scared. The prosecutor walked me through the timeline, the gradual onset of symptoms, the increasing isolation from friends and family, the financial irregularities I'd been too impaired to notice. With each detail, I watched Sarah's expression harden, as if she were angry at being caught rather than remorseful for what she'd done. Jennifer sat at the defendant's table beside her own lawyer, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with tissues. Her defense was that she'd been manipulated by Sarah, convinced that I was genuinely ill and that the money transfers were legitimate medical expenses. The prosecutors weren't buying it. The evidence showed she'd actively participated in creating the false narrative about my mental decline. Mr. Morrison, the prosecutor continued, what was your relationship like with your daughter before you discovered this conspiracy? That question hurt more than all the others combined. I loved Jennifer unconditionally. I was proud of her accomplishments, supported her through difficult times, and looked forward to being a grandfather to any children she might have. I never imagined she could participate in something like this. And now? I looked directly at Jennifer, seeing the tears streaming down her face. But I also remembered how she'd held my arms while Sarah tried to inject me with poison, how she'd chosen money over her father's life. Now I don't know who she is. The defense attorneys did their best to paint me as a confused old man whose testimony couldn't be trusted, despite the medical evidence showing I'd fully recovered once the drugs left my system. They argued that Sarah had genuinely believed I was ill, that her actions were motivated by love rather than greed. But the recordings destroyed that defense completely. The jury heard Sarah's own words admitting that she'd killed her first husband, that she'd carefully calibrated my poisoning to avoid detection, that she'd been planning my murder for 3 years. Thomas testified about his fake death and the investigation that had exposed Sarah's crimes. The private investigator presented evidence of her pattern with previous victims. Dr. Chang explained how the injection Sarah had tried to give me that final night contained enough cardiac glycosides to cause immediate heart failure. Most importantly, Detective Santos testified about Sarah's reaction when arrested. Instead of showing remorse or concern for my well-being, she'd continued to insist I was mentally ill and dangerous, even suggesting that the police should have me committed for my own safety. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When the jury returned with guilty verdicts on all counts, attempted murder, conspiracy, financial fraud, and medical fraud, Sarah showed no emotion. She sat perfectly still as the judge sentenced her to 25 years to life in prison, ensuring she'd never have the chance to target another victim. Jennifer received a lighter sentence, 8 years for conspiracy and financial fraud. Her lawyer had successfully argued that she'd been manipulated by Sarah, though the evidence suggested she'd known exactly what she was doing. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at me one final time. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. I nodded, but I didn't say anything back. Some apologies come too late to matter. After the trial, Thomas and I sat in a quiet restaurant, processing everything that had happened. He'd moved back to town and was helping me rebuild my life, restore my finances, and reconnect with the friends and colleagues Sarah had systematically alienated. "The insurance company is releasing the money she stole," Thomas told me over coffee. "They've also agreed to cover your medical expenses for treating the drug poisoning. You'll be comfortable, Richard." Comfortable. That word still made me shiver, remembering how Sarah had used it to describe my impending death. But Thomas was right. Financially, I would recover completely. Emotionally was a different story. "I keep wondering if there were signs I missed," I admitted. "Things I should have noticed earlier." "She was a professional, Richard. This wasn't her first time, and she'd perfected her technique over decades. You can't blame yourself for trusting your wife." But part of me did blame myself. I'd been so passive, so willing to let Sarah handle everything, that I'd made myself the perfect victim. I'd handed over control of my medical care, my finances, my relationships, believing that marriage meant complete trust. I'd learned the difference between partnership and surrender. The house felt different now, though I'd had all of Sarah's belongings removed and the surveillance equipment destroyed. I was considering selling it and starting fresh somewhere new, but for now it was home. I'd also hired a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who came in 3 times a week to help with cleaning and cooking. She was a cheerful woman in her 50s who chattered about her grandchildren and never asked probing questions about my medications or finances. After months of being manipulated and monitored, her simple honesty was refreshing. My friendship with Martin had been restored once he learned the truth about Sarah's deception. He'd driven down from Seattle to testify as a character witness during the trial, and we'd spent hours talking about the years we'd lost to Sarah's lies. "I should have tried harder," he told me over dinner at his hotel. "When your emails became strange and Sarah kept saying you didn't want visitors, I should have insisted on seeing you." "She was very convincing," I replied. "She had medical documents, psychiatric evaluations, everything needed to support her story. You couldn't have known." James, my former business partner, had also reached out after the trial made national news. He'd been one of the prosecution's witnesses, testifying about how Sarah had turned him away when he'd tried to visit, claiming I'd accused him of theft. "She was isolating you systematically," he said during our reunion, "making sure no one could contradict her narrative about your mental decline. It was brilliant in its cruelty." Slowly, I was rebuilding the social connections Sarah had severed. Not all of them could be restored. Some people had moved away or passed on during the years she'd kept me isolated. But enough remained to remind me that I wasn't alone in the world. Dr. Patricia Williams, my new physician, monitored my recovery from the drug poisoning with care and transparency completely different from Sarah's secrecy. She explained every test, every medication, every concern, treating me as a partner in my own health care rather than a patient to be managed. "Your cognitive function has returned to normal," she assured me during a 6-month follow-up. "The drugs your wife administered can cause permanent damage if given long enough, but you stopped taking them in time. You're going to be fine, Richard." Fine. It was a simple word, But it meant everything after months of believing I was losing my mind. The media attention gradually faded, replaced by other scandals and tragedies. Occasionally, I'd receive calls from reporters wanting to do follow-up stories or from victims' advocates asking me to speak about elder abuse. I declined most of these requests, preferring to move forward rather than relive the nightmare. But I did accept an invitation to speak at a medical conference about the signs of pharmaceutical abuse in elderly patients. Standing before an audience of doctors and nurses, I shared my story in the hope that it might help them recognize similar cases. The person poisoning me was also my primary caregiver, I told them. She controlled my medications, my medical appointments, my contact with healthcare providers. To outside observers, she appeared to be a devoted wife caring for an ailing husband. The system that should have protected me instead enabled my abuse. After my presentation, several healthcare workers approached me with stories of patients whose symptoms hadn't quite made sense, whose family members had seemed overly controlling or possessive. My experience had given them new perspective on cases they'd found puzzling. That felt like something positive emerging from the darkness. The possibility that my suffering might prevent someone else's. On quiet evenings, I sometimes thought about the life Sarah and I might have had if she'd been the person I believed her to be. 43 years of marriage should have led to comfortable retirement together, grandchildren, the peaceful twilight that couples dream of sharing. Instead, those years had been built on lies, manipulation, and ultimately attempted murder. The woman I'd loved had never really existed. She'd been a carefully constructed persona designed to gain my trust and access to my assets. But I wasn't bitter anymore. Anger had given way to something more like relief. I'd survived, I'd recovered, and I was free to live authentically for whatever years remained to me. Thomas and I had dinner every Sunday now, sharing the kind of relationship we should have had all along if Sarah hadn't orchestrated his fake death. He'd decided to stay in town permanently, and we were considering starting a small consulting business together. Nothing ambitious, just something to keep our minds sharp and provide purpose to our days. Any regrets? He asked me one evening as we sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I thought about it carefully. I regret that I trusted so completely that I stopped thinking for myself. I regret that I lost years with friends and family because I believed Sarah's lies. And I regret that Jennifer chose money over love. But I don't regret surviving. I don't regret learning the truth. And I don't regret that Sarah will spend the rest of her life in prison, unable to hurt anyone else. The sun disappeared behind the trees, leaving us in the peaceful darkness of a summer evening. Somewhere in the distance, children were playing in a neighbor's yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Life continued as it always does, offering second chances to those wise enough to recognize them. I was 66 years old, healthy, financially secure, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about my well-being. After everything I'd endured, that felt like victory enough.